Chapter 6. All of the biggest technological inventions created by man, the airplane, the automobile, the computer, says little about his intelligence but speaks volumes about his laziness. Arthur C. Clarke. The traveller's life is now filled with apps and websites. When I journeyed along the southern coast of the Euro continent, I could be as spontaneous as I like. Book a backpackers or a little hotel on the same day with one of the many accommodation apps. Get there by booking through the Eurail site. If there was no rail stop, use the bus booking site. Even little inter-country flights could be booked same day through all of their sites. Or just use one of those all-inclusive ones that contain flights, hotels, and even trains and buses if you were lucky. Though I read once that they rip off the little accommodation owners. Still, I use them as reference before going to the hotel site. Use a Maps app to get where you're going on foot from the train bus station. Then there's Uber if you don't feel like walking. I hated Uber's whole thing though, so I jump in taxis. In your new town, use that Maps app to bring up all the main sites to visit. And food, bars, bicycle rentals, grocery stores. In Barcelona and Paris, I use Maps to find love hotels that rented by the hour to have some of the best fun I've ever had with a casual hookup. And if you didn't want to stay with travellers only, book one of their homestay ones where the homeowner is there and wanting to really look after you. It was all about mutual positive reviews. And finally, how about grabbing a ferry? I ended up cruising the Adriatic on a car ferry from Venice to Greece without much previous planning for that option. Another taxi site to book the drive from Igoumenitsa to Athens port. Another taxi site to book the drive from Igoumenitsa to Athens port. Then I booked more overnight ferries to take me to the islands. I could have flown for cheaper, but I like ferries. I stayed in a cabin with other women, one of which had a little tub with the most gorgeous miniature turtle that she was taking home with her. It's always more interesting to be among the locals. And that taxi driver was so chuffed to get my fare, as it was sizable. He even let me smoke in the cab. God has blessed Greece. I remember my younger brother, when he went to Europe with his friends back in the 90s, describing the obstacles of his trip, communicating on public phones with hotel owners who didn't understand them. Sleeping in a park or bus terminal was not unheard of because they couldn't get that accom on time. I was living in the age of convenience. For me, as a road traveller in Oz, apps were also paramount, all the usual ones. Maps for route directions, caravan parks, grocery stores, tourist attractions, mechanics, and hotels for hookups. I really wished Australia had hourly love hotels. Maybe it does for the cheating husbands. Then there were the specialised ones. These were apps that I didn't know about on my lap. I found out about them through the Solo Women Travellers FB page. I'd already availed myself of the house sitting app. There were no house-sitting opportunities in Mirawoong and Broome. Time to try another. Woofing is its own thing, with its own site and possibly app. Accommodation and sometimes food in exchange for a few hours work a day. I remember Madeline complaining about a Euro guy that she'd had once where she had to supervise him every moment of his shift. So there was no point, she decided. I could imagine this bloke didn't have the easiest time. I chose a different one. A home and farm help app describing itself as finding workers for people who had permaculture farms. I guess they needed the delineation as people with shops, businesses, etc. might exploit the users and give the app a bad name. There were two choices of farm stays in Mirawoong on the woofing style app I explored. One was a bit out of town, nearer to a remote town north of Mirawoong. It was a cattle property and their spiel was that you'd get all the experience of working a real cattle station. I'd worked a real cattle station. As much as there are very down-to-earth people living on remote properties and working the cattle industry, I'd sure met a lot of small-minded conservative ones. Well, they're mostly conservative. It's just about how judgmental their political persuasions have made them. And in amongst that, don't even get me started on young ringers. It might not be safe as a solo woman who sees through these types in 2 seconds flat. Young women backpackers usually show up in twos because of this. The second option was a permaculture farm. The pics looked beautiful, and only half an hour out of town. I messaged straight away and didn't wait for a reply, instead heading off into the great unknown. Darwin to Miriwung, Kimberley country. It's not only like a different country, it's like a different planet. The volcanoes that form mesas that are the Kimberleys are well known from picturesque brochure and ad photography. I'm not even sure that's what makes them what they are. All I know is I've never seen anything like them. I stayed at a place called Victoria Creek, and these formations were all around. Red rock moulded into the most amazing shapes like the walls of castles, mountains that would be nearly impossible to climb. I like that about them. On top would be gorgeous, untouched secret gardens with date palms and other desert plants. I even tried to film them while driving, when the road ran through an opening in the rocks, but you could never do them justice on a phone camera while driving, even standing still. I got to a place called Timber Creek, grabbed a drink and headed out the servo. On my side of the road stood a young, light-skinned black guy who was about my height, with his thumb out. He was even cheeky and pleaded with me with his hands in prayer mode. Damn, it looked like I was picking up a hitchhiker. I didn't just do this easily. First thing, he had luggage, so he was a traveller. Second thing was Euro accent. A traveller on a traveller's visa is unlikely to do illegal shit because they'll get kicked out. Third thing, I asked him before he opened the door, "What's your story, mate? I'm a woman on my own here." I know you can't get an accurate answer on that because a killer would lie, wouldn't he? I hate to say it, but I was checking that he wasn't from community and I'd ended up getting carjacked with some others following behind. I needn't have worried though. All the Northern Territory roads and highways I've done, when you see community folks standing beside a broken car, they never hitch off white people. There's generally a lot of others they'd call on first. And frankly, I don't think they'd trust white people. Probably way less than white people would trust them. This makes sense. I gave some community teenagers a lift once near the Snowy Mountains. There was a whole bunch of them and I could only take 2. Putting strangers in the back of the van with all my shit is risky and illegal. I really liked how they prioritised the lift. The oldest and the youngest went with me. They'd all been at a bush tour, so I played some drum and bass and they nodded along. Great kids. Felix was from France, and he added that his father was from Kenya, hence his nice looks. He'd lost his hair and looked like he'd been through the mill a bit in his life. He'd been in Darwin and was due to fly back to France from there after the weekend. He was coming to see some friends in Miriwung and say goodbye. It was Thursday, and Darwin was nearly 1,000 kilometres away from Miriwung. There seemed to be a hole in his plans. I worked it out later what they probably were. In the meantime, we chatted away fairly easily. There was a quietness to him, though. He was no longer the cheeky chap on the side of the road. I wondered if my interrogation had triggered him a bit. Maybe I seemed a bit racist, even though I'm just being safe. If anything, I'm sexist. I generalise all males a bit too much. I told him about my plans to drive trucks, tractors, or both, and he started to talk about his friends. Afro-Europeans stuck together, it seemed. They were from Italy with an Italian mum and African dad who hailed from Malawi. I was proud of myself that I knew where Malawi was. Not many people would. I used to play an educational game on my phone where you had to locate African, Asian and European countries. It was a pretty steady game, but it was good because it was educational and non-addictive. Anyway, the Italian mother had bought a mango farm in Miriwung, and he suggested that I ask them if they needed a truck or tractor driver. It couldn't hurt. We rolled into Miriwung easily. It was only 200 kilometres from Timber Creek. He directed me to their house and invited me inside. I was pretty blown away by what I encountered. A young, tall, ridiculously attractive guy greeted me, and after giving Felix a hug, he included me also, saying thanks for bringing his brother to him. Pleasure was all mine, I silently decided. Another good-looking young fella came out of the house. He was the actual brother. Not a 10 like his brother, but still easy on the eyes. I thought we were doing European greetings, so I initiated the hug first. He seemed a bit perplexed at this. Suddenly there were about another 3 young fellas coming out of the house, all white and European. I didn't hug all of them. This was some kind of backpacker gold mine I'd happened upon. I really didn't expect that to be the case. There was still more to come at my next destination. Felix brought up the job thing, which I was glad about. He seemed to fade into the background now that we were surrounded by so much talent. I felt a bit sorry for him. The first brother seemed to fill the whole atmosphere with his presence. I imagine his probably older brother faded into his shadow throughout his life also. When you've got mixed-race parents, it's a bit of a lottery with how you're going to turn out because there's so many genes to choose from. I was lucky that I took after my dad. My mother was quite beautiful in her day also, but she's pale and blue-eyed. I was thankful for my dark eyes, hair, skin, and cultural ambiguity. My brothers didn't have that. The guys didn't have suggestions about the possibility of work. Instead, the head brother was trying to impress me with their flourishing business of a food truck selling Italian food. I was full of encouragement. How could I not be? While there, I rang my host, who'd messaged me and said to ring when I got to town so she could give me directions. Her name was Philippa. Philippa was slightly scary, even over the phone. It was like she'd already formed her opinion of me. How? I'm great at writing polite missives for things I want. I must have said something, I don't know what. The tone became short with me, like I was a young'un. I wondered if she hated women. She mentioned her son, and I wondered if she was an intolerable boy mum. I was about to find out. Philippa was nothing if not practical because her directions made a lot of sense. This isn't always the case with bush folk. They'll include landmarks that are no longer there, like right at the Caltex, which is now a Liberty Servo, but everyone in town still calls it the Caltex. The property was called Mira Glen. The property was called Miri Glen. She told me to pull up to the shed, but don't go into the house opposite it. She may as well have said, use the tradesman's entrance. When she finally showed up, she told me where to park the van. What I'm about to say next is not nice. I'm not exactly kicking down when I say this, though. The power balance was well established before I even got there. Philippa was over 6 feet tall, very blonde, and very pale, considering she lived in the semi-tropics, and built like a brick shithouse. Her physical presence was intimidating. There were patches under trees that had 250-volt outlets, just like a caravan park. Philippa then took me around, showed me the chooks, and said she hoped I'd be able to inject a bit of love in this department. I really didn't know what I'd do beyond feeding them. And that wasn't even my allotted job, because this place was packed with people. I met a new one daily for most of my first week. What was my allotted job? On my drive in, I'd passed a 1960s Bedford bus. Before she hit me with that job, she took me to the easier one, an 18-foot caravan that had new wall panels installed. It just needed a lick of paint, or 3. The Bedford was next. Her son was a tradie and did the paneling on all the vans. Like a tradie who has an actual job that pays, he'd half-ass the Bedford. It'd have to be finished before I could do a lick, or 7, of paint. I was pretty relieved about that. But I wasn't put off by the hard work. It would be easier than those fucking vine rolls in that Gorgetown house. Painting, like cleaning really dirty walls, and the cleaner you're using actually does its job, is satisfying. And this would be a good before and after project to film, like I'd done in Gorgetown. This is my preferred resume. Philippa had to rush off somewhere. I got the vibe that just showing me around and the things she wanted done was eating into her precious time. I was starting to expect that she was going to be difficult. Damn, maybe the cattle people would have been far easier. Philippa was obviously hippie adjacent, but she must have had a quid to afford this place. Maybe she was inherited wealth, like me. I thank Goddess every day that I didn't turn into a rich bitch, though. I kept it humble. I think my love of living minimalist in small spaces helped. A throwaway line about how another tenant was showing up to rent a lime green caravan right near my van spot, and she was off. I wandered over and checked out the communal kitchen, an absolutely beautifully built structure with only 2 walls. It was pretty dirty because it was exposed to outside elements. I'd seen worse communal kitchens, that's for sure. It had commercial-grade stainless steel benches and a commercial-sized fridge with glass doors, which I'd resentfully have to share. I mentioned to Philippa that I had my own fridge, and she said not to use it because that would use more power. So money was tight with Philippa. I guess the whole use of free labour went part and parcel with being thrifty. Oh well, I'd adapt, like I always did. There were two other dishevelled caravans and a Toyota Cruiser bus, also lime green. I later learned who lived there. The cruiser was housing a French couple who were working for free on a beautiful camp that lay about a kilometre away on the riverbank. The paddock that lay between this commune, hippie commune was how I described the place's aesthetic, and the riverbank contained several heifers and a big, beautiful Brahman bull. Apparently he wasn't safe to walk near, so don't just go wandering down to the riverbank, according to Philippa. One caravan housed her son, Aidan, who was working away for his building job. The outside of that van was jam-packed with stuff, so I could only imagine what the hoarding situation going on inside the van was like. A messy young male. The other caravan was the exact opposite, neat and tidy, and the abode of a couple of French guys who were an actual couple. Meeting young gay Euromen in the backpacker scene was pretty unusual. I look forward very much to meeting them. There was even another house tucked in among the commune. It housed another 2 to 3 people, a young Basque woman, a Spanish guy who was working away, and an Aussie girl, Imogen, who was Aidan's ex-girlfriend. Again, commune came to mind. But because of the nature of Mirawoong and its love of backpacking labour, everyone had a paying job. It was just me and the cruiser bus French couple who were free labour. And then came the final tenant. A trader ute pulled up and a 30-plus Aussie skippy male bounded out like a Labrador puppy. He was so damn enthusiastic and friendly that I lost my fear of living with a potential sexist bogan. Matt. How to describe this bloke? I never met any Aussie male like him. I guess that's because the meth addicts I know are a lot wealthier than he probably is, so therefore calmer and less obvious. Socio-economic level really shows itself in the drug scene. He looked into the caravan, thought it was the best accommodation he'd found, chatted away a mile a minute about where he'd been living and what he did for work, gave me the wandering eye and decided he liked what he saw, and handed me a fistful of pineapples, the first 2 weeks up front of his rent. I was shocked that Philippa had so rapidly endowed me with a kind of 2IC responsibility, considering she didn't seem that impressed with me. It was probably an honesty test. I'd been tested before in stupid ways by house sitters, so this could be the case. When Philippa came back, I naturally pressed those bills into her large, soft white hands as quickly as I could. She then set about giving me my first job, stringing meters and meters of fairy lights in a tree by the communal kitchen. It was offhand and unplanned, like she'd noticed the lights out of the corner of her eye and remembered that they had to be strung, and that she would in no way do the stringing. It was a Thursday and there was the communal dinner that night. She decided it'd be nice to have fairy lights above it. I, of course, obliged. I found a wreck of a ladder and teetered on it precariously while battling frustrating knots that were only second in frustration levels to fishing line. Balling them up and throwing over tree limbs saw me miraculously not overbalancing on the ladder when I stretched my arms and torso out to catch the thrown bundle again. After about half an hour of this, Philippa showed up with another job. I said that I hadn't finished this one yet, to which she replied tartly, "Well, how long is it going to take?" This seemed rhetorical, so I didn't answer. Not only was she all over the place organisationally, she was a bossy cunt. Luckily, I've experience with these types. Don't argue, do what she says. Sow dissension amongst the workers against the boss. It's easy because I wouldn't be the only one getting subjected to this treatment. Once I'd finished whatever other menial shit she'd asked me to do, adding that job had priority because it would help her make accommodation money, so she was a broke bossy bitch by the sounds, I was free. I wandered into the communal kitchen and, of course, met another commune member. This one was a young fella, good-looking, white Brit with badly formed short dreadlocks. His name was Pierre. I surmised he had French in him from the name and the nice blush in his flesh, though he was a full Brit with a semi-posh accent. Daddy's rich and Mama's good-looking, maybe. He seemed to sleep around the place. There was a hammock in a glamping tent that was sometimes his. While the son, his childhood friend, was away, he was in this van. I learnt that he worked in a zebra stone factory and it was often covered in the red dust, which might have been the real reason for his rosy hue. Later I learnt that he also wasn't big on using soap, just rinsing himself. He seemed pretty focused on me. A white guy with dirty dreadlocks wasn't an option, but I took his attention as a compliment. To be honest, I was still thinking of the eager, hot older brother that Felix was staying with. That one would definitely make the time pass quickly here, whatever the shit situation I found myself in. Matt came into the kitchen soon after, and I helped him out with fridge shelf allocation and a few other things. Pierre left me to that, and I figured Pierre left a lot of things to women to organise. He wasn't very far out of the nest, a gap year kid. Matt initially started to bend my ear about his life and whatever he could fill a silence with. I got a bit impatient and directed my convo to Pierre. Matt didn't like this one bit, and I felt bad for him. But as the saying goes, if you have to say yeah and wow more than once when you're in a convo, you're not in a convo, you're an audience member. Because he wasn't getting what he wanted from me, he shifted his attention to Pierre. The guy was so young, polite and soft, and probably flattered that this older fellow was showing him attention. The neediness on poor Matt gave me the willies, so I extricated myself. Oh, to be alone and away from every person I'd met so far. But I had to admit to myself, I was looking forward to being around so many young'uns. They were easy on the eye, and they were curious, interested in me and my tales. Well, except for Matt. Luckily, my choices for company were only going to get better.